Hey, team players, and welcome back. It is an absolutely great day here at Local Football Flavor. We have finally completed our first wave of rankings, which means we have overrated players, we have underrated players, and we have all of those gorgeous league-winning sleepers. All that coming up on a live Mega Millions Best Ball Draft starting right now. So, Bob, you got a chance to obviously look at some of the rankings we had, and we're not going to show the full rankings to everyone here because that's just not what we do, but we do highlight upon some of the specific things. And in our episodes leading up to today, we have done a lot of what we call narrative drafting, which is very important because if you believe a certain way, you need to draft a certain way. It's just the way that it is. But today we're going to be going just of our raw, dirty numbers, which are the way that it's going to be. So, Bob, since you've seen these numbers before, what were some of the initial things that jumped off to you? They're like, whoa, that was cool, or I'm not sure about that.
Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting about rankings in general, right, is how you can use them to verify or construct a team based upon certain strategies. So one of the things that everybody knows about Joe is that he tends to be a little bit running back heavy. And as our rankings come out, it's kind of skewed him in the opposite direction. Basically because when we look at these drafts and we look at what's currently the landscape of drafting, both on Underdog and on DraftKings, it's the fact that it is very apparent that in the first two rounds, you need to capture the value there at the high-end wide receiver position. And one of the reasons being is that these wide receivers, unlike most wide receivers in the league, can score consistently above 20 points. And if you were joining us last week when we were looking at Superflex drafts in particular, you will have seen that the value of wide receivers went down. And you might say, well, why? Well, people want to capture that value at quarterback in those drafts and at running back because it tends to dry up a little bit quicker. And there are still wide receivers with a lot of upside in the middle, round 6 through round 9 in those Superflex drafts. But in these Mega Millions drafts, that dries up faster. And it's very clear that you can capture value out of the running back position, particularly in round 4 and round 5, when guys like Alvin Kamara, guys like Ken Walker, Chuba Hubbard, Omarion Hampton, players like that are still available to you. And I think today it's going to present us with a lot of opportunities. Maybe we go Bucky Irving in the second, third round. Maybe we do that. But it's also clear that I think this season above others is that a lot of people are going to push. And we do this sometimes too, to show you what happens in these drafts. But I think a lot of people are pushing for the round 8 through 11 quarterbacks a lot more than usual. So if you're doing like one draft, people are pushing into that 8 to around 8 to 11 quarterbacks. And I think in these, looking at the numbers from last year and then looking at the projected numbers for this year, it's very clear that if you don't have a quarterback, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, if you don't have a quarterback that can score you plus 25 points on their best week, particularly you want plus 28 points in a particular week, you shouldn't roster them. So, you can find a narrative for yourself that maybe you say, oh, well, I want Geno Smith on my roster, particularly if you have a guy like Jacoby Myers, right? Or Brock Bowers. That makes sense within that narrative. But when I'm looking at quarterbacks is I don't really want to pair Geno Smith with, Jared Goff, because if Jared Goff's best week is also going to be Geno Smith's best week, then I'm losing out on value in the round that I got Jared Goff in. And I could have just gotten Geno Smith. But where Geno Smith, and this is just an example, is valuable to you is if you were to go out in the second, third, fourth round and get Daniels or Hurts or Lamar or Allen. Because if they have a down week, Geno's best week is going to be up there in that 25, 26 category, but usually he's not up there. So one of the things that I think is really important is that in these drafts, if you're going high-end quarterback, and we talk about hero quarterback a lot, and I think that that should be a thing, and I don't think many people will mention that as being one, but a lot of media is pushing you down the board and saying, suck up the value at wide receiver, suck up that value somewhere else. But I think it's really important to understand that there is going to be value at certain positions, and I'm okay in this first round here, shooting for the moon with, like, if Puka and Nico were to fall to us, I mean, I would absolutely love that. And
let's address one of the things that make our rankings unique here, Bob, is that unlike the vast majority of rankings you see out there that are only either macro data or care about the regular season, we do not overvalue the regular season. These rankings are for best ball. And if you look at the way the best ball tournaments are made, they are broken into 4 segments that you have to win each segment. Regular season is week 1 to 14. You have to win that to advance. You have to win week 15, you have to win week 16, and you have to win week 17. That's the only way you win that. So one of the major things is that week 1 to 14 is only 1/14 of week 15, 16, and 17. So the regular season, while important, is nowhere near as important as the playoffs. So you're going to see us skewing very hard towards particular people because of what those 3 playoff games are going to be. The other thing is that we don't do macro data at all. We are completely built by historical game trends and what the trends of these games will be in terms of their fantasy. So you're going to see us have some answers where people are going to be like, whoa, hell no. But the whole goal is to win 2 million. It's not to win our ratings here on on June 16th.
So
and our number 1 receiver by a lot is Collins. And to get him in the first round at the end of the first round, I take as a big win.
So here's the thing too. When we look at wide receiver data and we think about how this can, and we look at these first round wide receivers, BTJ's there, that'd be really nice. And we look at these first round wide receivers, all of these wide receivers, particularly as you go down through like BTJ, right? These guys are players that are projected to score 20 plus points, 24 plus points in a given week, right? Is when you look at their best week, is that all of these players, what's up, Magic? All of these players have the potential to go for 30 plus points. And I think that when you look at that on DraftKings in particular, knowing that this is a format where it is full PPR, getting one of those guys is really, really important. And to pair one of those top-end wide receivers in the vein of Nico, you got to remember, guys, that Nico missed a lot of time last year. And once he came back, granted, the room was injured. However, when we look at what they brought in, it is 2 very valuable rookies. They brought in Christian Kirk, and this is going to be a room that looks much different than it did last year. But it's also very apparent that CJ Stroud knows that if they're going to win games, it is going to go through Nico Collins. And I think that Nico Collins has just as much upside as a guy like Justin Jefferson, but you don't have to pay that Justin Jefferson price. And I think that by the end of the year, when
I haven't ranked for the purposes of winning best ball better than Chase and anyone else. The thing that Collins has in his favor that only really Chase and J. Jeff also have is that regardless of the game script, the ball is getting forced his way. And that is one of the things there. Now, the benefit that Houston has compared to Minnesota and Cincinnati is they're going to be scoring games where the receivers get more points. It's just better matchups in 15, 16, and 17. Again, goal is to win the 2 million, not to win the regular season.
Now, as we look at this second round, guys,
Bob, I love the fact there's no red yet. I'm loving this.
I think one of the things that's really clear as we go through each draft and as we have been all off season so far is that these second round wide receivers, T. Higgins, AJ Brown, Drake London, Ladd McConkey, BTJ, and in this draft, Amon-Ra St. Brown made it, but I'm more so talking about the AJ Brown, T. Higgins, Drake London, and Ladd McConkey. These guys are elite. When they're on the field, there is elite production coming out here. And so you might say, well, why didn't you take one of those guys? Well, the experiment here is to take a look at the rankings that we have and to take a look and try to get the best possible lineup from those rankings. And one of the things that we look at when we look at these wide receivers in comparison to these running backs is that these running backs in the second round and these wide receivers that are in the second round are going to really shoot out kind of comparable numbers, I think, on given the whole year. But when you compare them to that top end running back room, every one of those guys in the second round is going to be competing for top 5 numbers. I just want to say it again to make it clear. Every one of those second round running backs has a very good chance to compete for a top 5 spot. You might say, well, that sounds a little bit crazy, but the numbers per game when these 4 guys in the second round are healthy are insane. You saw JT at the end of last year with 30-plus point games. You've seen Devin Achane in the past with 30-plus point games. These running backs, while these wide receivers in the second round are great.
Lamar's my number 1 quarterback, guys, and my number 1 player overall. I wanted to come to me. But Jamie and Magic will answer your questions as well.
Don't worry about it, Joe. But I really want to just be clear that Bucky is a bit of a pull up here, but he can put up insane production. So
Bucky is our number 1 running back. Period.
He will probably end up that way. Now, building off a little bit of a stack, not too bad there. I would like to go knowing that we have those 2 guys, though, Joe. I know that he's not super high up in your rankings, but I would like Baker at some point in time.
And we knew Baker, but I'm doing Hurts here. So here's the thing. The rankings actually have virtually no stack overlap this year. It's really interesting when you look at that. And part of the reason is there are some teams, the way they play, that is very stacked, and they make a whole lot of points together as a stack. Dallas, Cincinnati are that way. And what has entered into the popular lexicon is that you need to have a stack. But when you look at the 4 quarterbacks that are the top 4 quarterbacks, all of them, Daniels to the least degree, are valuable assets as standalone assets.
Yeah, we know
because
that.
Of their legs.
And here's
that's my point is they are better than stacked. They just are.
Here's the thing.
3 of them.
When we look at just those 4 particular quarterbacks in general, and I think the viewing audience does know this, but when we look at these 4 quarterbacks, is that the naked quarterback out of these 4 pays off so often. And I think that when we look at the stacking partners for these 4 quarterbacks in particular, is that Hurts and Allen, more so than Lamar and Daniels, but Hurts and Allen don't necessarily need to be stacked with their wide receiver partner to be successful. I think a nice thing to remember and a good thing to remember about all 4 of these quarterbacks, maybe a little bit less on Josh Allen, but we'll see this year, is that these 4 quarterbacks have tremendous tight end stacking partners. And what I want to make clear is something that we've talked about a lot, is the fact that when you look at the 4 quarterbacks here and you look at their tight end stacking partners, that's going to lead to a lot of touchdowns. And in Underdog in particular, this is DraftKings, but in Underdog in particular, I am looking to stack each one of those elite level quarterbacks with their tight end. So the Zach Ertz, the Dallas Goedert, Mark Andrews, likely, and Kincaid. That's what I'm really looking for. Now, I can go with an unstacked Hurts. I don't have a problem with that in particular. I do want to point out, though, that team number 2 is building what I think is going to be a tremendous wide receiver room that could be extremely deadly.
It doesn't matter. He'd already wasted one of his picks.
Watch out for that.
Godwin will never hit the field for him.
So, Jamie, Nico's
I'd argue team number 1 is infinitely better than team number 2 because of that. And team number 3 has wasted one of their picks as well.
In the NFL. And that's a good stat for upside. Absolutely. And that's kind of the thing that we're looking at, is that when we think about where these wide receivers are running situational routes, are they being given more design plays? What's going on with the offensive line? All of these things need to be put into the decision-making process. So you might look at a guy like Nico on paper and be like, oh yeah, Nico had a down year last year, but it was only a down year because he was hurt. And when we look at Puka, for example, Puka's another one of those players that has a tremendous route per run rate, and had a down year. And same with CeeDee Lamb. His quarterback was injured half the time. You look at those 3 wide receivers, and I think those 3 wide receivers, that if you were to take them over a guy like Jefferson or a guy like Chase, people might call you really crazy. But I don't think that it's that far off that they could finish, top 3 overall. Shame we missed out on Hubbard there. He was a good option.
Shame I missed out on Hubbard and Kamara. I would have taken either one gladly there.
So who you got here?
A little bit of spot. I'm not happy. This is probably going to end up being
say it before you click
probably
it.
Won't get him otherwise. This is going to be Myers because I won't get him on the comeback of the next.
No. Dude, you got it. You got to stop doing that. You were going to get him.
I do not got to stop doing it.
Ken Walker was the play there. We need another running back. Ken Walker was the play there.
Ken Walker's not the play. He's not high enough on my rankings.
Jacoby Myers was going to fall.
This is strictly off the rankings, Bob. Ken Walker doesn't have a good playoff run.
I get it.
He doesn't.
I get it.
I want $2 million. I don't want to have a losing just because I have Ken Walker.
I think you're wrong on that one.
David Montgomery and the running game is going to destroy that. If you look at what Detroit has, aside from the fact that Montgomery has a ton of upside if Gibbs would go down, his standalone value is higher than Walker's. If you look at the 3 playoff games that he has, as well as his per game basis during the regular season, it's better than Walker's, straight up. Monty is a guy that a lot of people are sleeping on, and he's great. Now, granted, I wanted this pick to be 2 running backs with Chubb or Kamara on the Hubbard or Kamara where I have Myers, but Monty is getting very slept upon overall. Being a 7th round guy, he really should be a 5th.
So I just want to say that I have no problem with David Montgomery. You can write a really good narrative that David Montgomery will be a really good pick this year. But the one problem that I have, and it's sort of comparable, and Magic, I see your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those in a moment, is that both Walker and Montgomery last year were really down in terms of how much volume they had. And I think that when I look at volume concerns, saying that everybody's going to stay healthy and the status quo is going to be the same, for example, let's say Gibbs doesn't get hurt, Gibbs plays a full year, Montgomery doesn't get hurt, Montgomery plays a full year, everything goes Ken Walker the same way.
I got you. His standalone value is still ahead of Walker's. That's just the Detroit
when we look at the numbers,
they run the ball.
When we look at the volume numbers, Joe, it's the fact that I do think that, the Lions will run the ball consistently enough. They do have those issues with the offensive line that they have to clean up. But Ken Walker is the more explosive player. And Ken Walker, depending on the type of scheme that's run against him and the type of scheme that they are running in particular, is a very electric player. And I don't think David Montgomery has that type of electric upside. So when we're looking at players that can get 30-plus yard runs.
Monty's never giving you the 80-yard touchdown run like Saquon, but he will give you 3 goal line touchdowns a game.
Listen, and this is what I'm trying to bring up to you, is that I think having both of them would have been a better play over Jacoby Myers. And I think that that's what you're missing from the conversation that I'm trying to throw out there. I get that Jacoby Myers is high in your rankings, but I also think that Jacoby Myers has a very high chance of being there in the 7th round. That's
the part I disagree with, because first off, his ADP is like 67 right now. So his ADP is right next to Jennings. So I do not think Myers would have come around the 83. I think
that having the flexibility of Ken Walker and David Montgomery is better than putting Jacoby out there. That's just a personal opinion.
Well, see, here's the reason I don't is because overall, the running back group is less, it has more sleepers in it than the receiver group.
Well,
so I have to push the high-end receivers. I have to push them more than the running backs. So, for instance, I'm going to take two guys here on this turn that probably are both considered above ADP right now. In fact, they both are. But I'll never get them back on the following turn. And
can you say who they are so we at least know here?
You'll see them in 3 seconds here, Bob. In fact, actually, this thing's lagging a little bit. I might have already clicked the button by the time you hear this. That's part of the problem.
So, Magic, which wide receivers are you not taking over Rice at his cost? A.J. Brown, Wilson, Higgins. So I think that in DraftKings in particular, that Rice is priced up a little bit too high for my liking at this moment in time. So I really, really like Rice. And I think that Rice has great potential with a full season under Patrick Mahomes. He was on pace for being a top 5 wide receiver. He's the case. It's kind of like, I would really like to push Rice a lot. But I probably wouldn't take Rice over A.J. Brown if available. The thing that I think is really important to remember about A.J. Brown is A.J. Brown was still like his target share on his team last year, despite them not throwing the ball a lot, was up near like 25-ish%, something like that. And I think that you cannot sleep on something that incredible, even if it comes with some down weeks and some up weeks. In best ball, ideally, I would be taking A.J. Brown and Rice at that turn if I'm on DraftKings, just like the person did at number 1 overall. Higgins, for me, has so much elite upside. He is one of those players, I'm going to say it again, he has top 5 upside on a week-to-week basis. He's a guy that can score 30 points if given the opportunity.
Which one is that, Bob?
Higgins. And I would love to take, say that again?
The rookie?
No, T. Higgins.
I was like, sorry, the rookie's on my queue from Houston.
So I would love all 3 of those guys. And I think I would take A.J. Brown and Higgins over Rice, but I wouldn't take Wilson over Rice. I think that all 4 are pretty comparable. And I think that if you're at the back end of the second round here, at the 1, 2, 3 turn there.
But Magic, I do want to point out a major Rice concern, and this is something that affects him a lot in our rankings, is that Kansas City has a lot of rest disadvantage during the playoffs. They play a lot of short weeks in consecutive order, and that will hold all of their receivers down. So as much as I love Rishi as a regular season dominant threat, I don't think he can be a league winner for you. I think he can get you the 1 seed and then fall off in the playoffs. And I think that Kansas City's offense overall is screaming all of the prime indicators that that's what they're going to do. So I know I said this specifically about Pacheco before. The same thing's applicable to all of their offense. That lack of rest and burnout factor that they're going to have at the end of the year, it's a major concern for them. Not saying they won't win the games, they won't advance, but they're not going to win the games with 28 points. They're going to win the games with 20. And that's what really indicates the slowdown, because they're going to kill the clock. They're going to start shortening the game.
When I look at this question here, Magic, and I think about Puka and Devontae Adams, we talk about Puka and Devontae Adams a lot on the show. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that we understand Matt Stafford as a quarterback. He has a very cemented kind of target distribution, is that if you are like the 3rd, 4th option on the chart, you aren't really getting that high of a target share from Matt Stafford. And Matt Stafford is one of those players that, even though Kyron runs the ball a lot, is that on average, you're getting 26 plus attempts per game most of the time, and you are dipping occasionally into that 30 and 40 attempts per game pool. Just going back to last year, the game against the Rams that was played, what week was this? In November. It wasn't the playoff game.
Damn it.
But back in November, we look at the game against Philly. He had 36 pass attempts. And when we take a look at where those passes went, 9 of them went to Puka, 8 of them went to Cooper Kupp. Okay. The rest was a smattering of other players. We take a look at a 24 attempt game against New Orleans, a game that they were pretty cemented in leading that game towards the end of the game. We look at 5 attempts to Puka and then 2, 2, 2, 3 for everybody else. Didn't complete a lot, just had a lot of attempts. And then we take a look at the game against Miami, where he had 46 attempts, 32 completions. We look at it again as Puka at 9 and Cooper Kupp at 7, and then the tight end was the next stop. So for me, I think that when I'm looking at Puka versus Davante Adams, so that was 14 targets for Puka, 7 for Cooper Kupp in that game. I think that when we look at it, I think you can probably say there's probably going to be like a 60-40 split still. That Puka is going to most likely get the majority of those targets. But Davante Adams is an elite option, and he's an elite option particularly near the red zone as well. He has been playing that role for a very, very, very long time. And I think that what we could be looking at, I think a good upside game for Davante Adams would be somewhere in that discussion of where Cooper Kupp was, with maybe a little bit more yards. So we have Cooper Kupp around 8 targets a game. With a talent like Davante Adams, I think you could maybe at times push him into 9, 10 targets a game, but I don't think he's going to get to 10 targets a game a lot. I think he's probably going to settle into that 8 targets a game. And Davante Adams is one of those guys that can catch all the targets. So you could be looking at a potential floor for Davante Adams in any given week. I think in PPR in particular is going to be somewhere around where like an average decent enough game would be for somebody else. So you're looking at like 13 points, I think. 13 points.
For Adams, I think that's a very safe floor. I think his floor realistically is 70 yards and 7 catches. That's the floor of Adams every week.
And then where his bonuses is where those touchdowns are coming from. I think that Davante Adams, and I'm just going to look up the numbers really quickly because I don't have them on hand. I want to look up the red zone stats for Davante Adams last year. And this is from the Raiders last year. Again, only on the team part of the year. 19 targets, 9 receptions. I mean, when you look at that type of eliteness in the red zone, I don't think that you can scoff at putting Davante Adams, whether he's your 3rd wide receiver or your 4th wide receiver. I think he's going to be a stellar option moving forward. And you might ding him a little bit with the playoff schedule. But honestly speaking, I don't think that that's something that I'm considering to worry about, because I do like their Week 17 game against Atlanta. I think that both of those wide receivers, and being that essentially when we look at the Rams schedule at the back end of the season, sorry, I'm dealing with like a ulcer on my tongue, so it's like really hard sometimes for me to talk.
How'd you get an ulcer on your tongue?
Drinking summer shandy. That's how that happens.
What?
Yeah. So when we look at the back end of the schedule, it's Lions, Seahawks, and Falcons. The only game that would concern me would be the Seahawks game, because that might be really, really shitty weather. And that could lead to some, not so great passing game, probably a lot of runs from Kyron, because Seattle during that time of the year could be bad. But I think that when we look at that schedule, 2 dome games, one against the Lions, and that should be a high-powered game, one against the Falcons. And if you can get past the Seattle game, I think that both Kyron, Puka, and Davante Adams are some guys that I'm leaning into, particularly if I'm in that kind of 7 spot and I'm not sure what to do there. It's a little bit early on Dobbins, isn't it?
His ADP would have been the the middle of the 40s, so he wasn't going to come back to me.
Talk about a guy that's
climbed. And I had him as by far the best value on the board.
I don't disagree with that, but I think that is I think one of the things, Magic, before I answer this question here, and another early pick there. What's up, family? What's up, family?
Well, they're not early picks when you have them ranked incredibly high. It's making sure you get your guys so you don't have the loss.
We'll get to that. I have
Tillman ranked as a top 30 player.
We'll get to that at another point in time. I don't want to talk about that right now. We'll talk about why this is something you and I talked about on the phone yesterday. So we gotta think through that a little bit.
I'm still keeping ADP in mind for my builds.
So Magic,
I also not letting my players get lost.
When it comes with the best wide receivers in each round from rounds 2 through 5, I think that there's a lot of good players. Let me just pull up an ADP list right now. Again, this is going to be a best ball ADP list. When we think about rounds 2 through 5, I think players that you want to keep your eye on in particular, one of the biggest players that you want to keep your eye on is JSN. I know that we missed out on JSN a lot last week when we were trying to target him. He's one of those guys that is going to be a part of a team. Again, Seattle weather is a little bit spotty at best, but he's going to be a pretty high target earner. And I think that when we look at how Sam Darnold performed last year with J-Jeff feeding the ball to J-Jeff and Addison, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that JSN can return a top 10 overall finish. I do think that he's going to have the potential for some top 5 weeks. I really like him. Currently, Fantasy Pros has him ranked as wide receiver 14. I think that he's going to be a nice value there. When it comes to other guys in that third round, I like Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. has a good playoff schedule. He also is on a team that if they don't pass him the ball, they're going to be in for another fan-ridden season where fans are going to be saying you have potentially one of the best wide receiver prospects around, and you aren't giving them the ball. So I think we talked about Rashee Rice. I think Rice, I like Devontae Adams, Marv, and Jackson Smith and Jigba for that 2-3 kind of round frame. Don't sleep on Mike Evans either. Mike Evans is one of those guys that
Mike Evans is a great guy.
If he can get to the point of Baker trusts him, we talk about trusting quarterbacks all the time. If Baker can continue to do the things that he did last year and Mike Evans stays healthy, Mike Evans is going to return weekly value. I don't think that he'll end up by season's end as potentially better than Nico or better than Rice, but he has a pathway because that pathway has always been there. He has been a reliable.
I think he'll end up better than Rice. Nico maybe not, but
he's been a reliable.
The thing that you saw with Mike Evans at the end of the year last year was they went out of their way to get him his yardage after he came back from his injury. Like they force fed him the ball, which is something you want to see when it comes to week 14 and beyond.
Yeah. And I think as we go through down and go further down the list, guys that I'm keeping my eye on that I really like in terms of value picks that go a little bit later. Jameson Williams is one of the guys that is a very easy click when he comes around a lot of the times. Sometimes I even just take him a couple picks before ADP. I think the upside with JMO, granted, Ben Johnson has gone and JMO had his best year of his career, but also he was healthy. He was a guy that was really integral in making this offense work, and he has that touchdown upside. So JMO is one of those guys that I'm clicking a lot of, and I think my portfolio is pretty full of JMO. One player that I think is being slept on, particularly in round 5, if you're on Underdog, he goes really late. And he's a player that I really like in the Superflex drafts because of how late he goes, is Chris Godwin.
Let me show you the 5th round for you guys. You guys can go through it.
Chris Godwin isn't one of my favorite plays of all time. He's not one of my favorite players of all time. But I think when we think about where the elite upside could be, you could say that Liam Cohen did a lot. brought him back to his form. But I think the value that you're getting at Chris Godwin is that you're reaching for upside when you pick Chris Godwin here, because what you've seen is that what you get from a guy like Cam Sutton in particular is you're getting a reliable enough touchdown earner. But now RJ Harvey is there. Now J.K. Dobbins is there. We know Bo Nix will run the ball. We know they have Evan Ingram there. And so the amount of touchdowns that Courtland Sutton is going to get probably is going to have to come from a little bit further out. And I think that his touchdown production goes a little bit down while Chris Godwin's can go up. Another player that's a super easy click for me is Calvin Ridley. We talked about Calvin Ridley a little bit earlier in the season, a little bit earlier in the offseason. And the volume, I think, is one of those things that pushes Ridley into the 5th round for most people. If he had a better quarterback and the volume was what you might say is better volume in that, the targets are closer to the red zone, I think you could get that this year with Cam Ward. I think that Calvin Ridley is an exceptional red zone threat. And when you think about Chig or Gunnar Helm, maybe they get a little bit of those touchdowns as well. And Tony Pollard will always sneak in from the 5 as well. But, I think that Calvin Ridley has a tremendous amount of upside. You're looking at a guy that had like 70 catches last year with 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. There is upside to spare. I mean, if he even goes up to 6 touchdowns or 7 touchdowns and maintains 1,000 yards on 70 catches or 80 catches, you're cleaning up on value there. So I think that those are some of the guys that at this moment in my mind are players that I am definitely targeting more often than not. And Cam Ward is one of those players that, while in best ball formats, some people might shy away from him until the 14th round. But I think if I'm given the opportunity to select Cam Ward over Sam Darnold or over Aaron Rodgers, that I'm doing it probably 85 times out of 100. He's a very easy click that late for best ball because, I mean, heck, if he turns in just a modest week, you could be looking at probably like 16 points. If he returns a week that he's balling out and Ridley ends up balling out, I mean, that pair for me, especially in week 17, they have an incredible matchup week 17. I think that if you are looking at the best stack in the market today for the price that you need to get, I think there's 2. But the one that I think is really, really, really obvious, and I think that more people should be clicking it, is Calvin Ridley and Cam Ward. And you can even put Chig in there, and you could put a couple other guys in there. But I think that stack right there will be able to have potentially top 10, top 5 upside on a week-to-week basis, particularly with Cam Ward. I'm not saying he's going to regularly end up in the top 5 for scoring, but I think that it's not out of the realm of possibility for Ridley to get, a 20-point week. And for him to get a 20-point week, Joe, that's looking that would be like we were talking about with Devontae Adams, right? Is that's looking like 100 yards, 7 catches, and a touchdown. Boom, you're done. Is that in the realm of possibility for Ridley?
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, that, and you're getting that in the 5th round. And I think that when you look at the 5th round wide receivers, Joe, after you make this pick, if you could scroll up to the 5th round again, when you're looking at the 5th round wide receivers overall, you got to look at it and say, well, the amount of upside with these guys, particularly in the fifth round right here, is tremendous. Again, I don't like Zay Flowers, and it's just kind of a can you unclick that? I don't like Zay Flowers, but I will say that when you have a guy with 4 touchdowns on the year, kind of like Calvin Ridley, and you look at where his production is coming from, if he breaks open a couple more of those big gains, you could see that is going to be value. And I think that people are very settled for the most part. Like, oh, Tet, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Xavier Worthy, JMO, we know that they have upside, but there's not really kind of like a better pick there. Zay is one of the most meh picks at his value. He is. I mean, there is nothing to be excited about with Zay Flowers. I mean, we go in and we look at his production and we say, oh, this is a guy that needs a lot of things to go right in order for him to put up an incredible game. But let's kind of just look at this from this perspective last year. He did not finish in the top 12 a lot. And I think that that's where Zay really falls down in half PPR a lot more, because he's finishing way, way, way lower. But the upside is there enough. When I look at his possible upside, especially with Lamar, there were 3 games last year where he pinged out at a top 3 finish, a top 6 finish, and a top 11 finish. Now, you would like, if you're picking Zay in the 5th round, you want to see that more. You want to see those 30s go into top 20s. You want to see the 14s jump up in the top 20 or top 10. I think it's possible with Zay Flowers if there is an injury to, say, Mark Andrews, or there's an injury to Isaiah Likely. But I think as long as Derrick Henry is there, it is going to be an issue for Zay Flowers to earn targets in the capacity that you need him to earn good targets. Because you look at it in the games where he finished pretty well. He had 12 targets. He finished 14th. He had 12 targets. He finished 14th. He had 11 targets. He finished 11th. He had 10 targets here, finished 36th. That's kind of weird, but he didn't get a lot of yards.
Can I point out something that's a shocker to most people, Bob? Most people don't see the kind of receiver Zay is. Zay is a possession receiver. He is not a rack guy. And that's to your points of saying he's had all of these receptions, but he can't break in higher. It's because he's not really a rack guy. It's one of the weird parts about Baltimore's offense. Everyone thinks he is, but he's not.
I just kind of want to be a little bit more kind of clear about Zay, is that Zay has a floor of Wan'Dale Robinson, but he has a ceiling of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And there is not often enough where Zay is reaching the ceiling of Amon-Ra St. Brown to make you want to pick him in the 5th round over the guys that I've already mentioned. I mean, heck, even a guy like Rome Odunze, right? When we look at 5th round potential, 5th round breakout, 5th round, whatever you want to call it, Zay Flowers has the floor of Wan'Dale Robinson, but the ceiling of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And you are only going to get those Amon-Ra games maybe 5 times a year. Whereas Chris Godwin, you could get those games
week in, week out.
Week in, week out. With the guys that we mentioned earlier, you could get those games week in, week out, and I don't think it's an issue. Now, when we look at Olave is a really interesting player. I think if you are taking Olave, you are either going to be super high on Rattler, not super high to the degree that you're going to pick him really high, but you also are going to be super high on Shuck, something like that. But you're also super high on the fact that when we look at this team in general, it's kind of like the Garrett Wilson kind of phenomena in a way, is that I'm not downgrading Shaheed in any respect, but Shaheed's one of those players that is going to be, Derek Carr could get him the ball. He was one of those guys that could get a long route and break it and get a touchdown. We don't know if Shook or Rattler we know to a degree, but for Shook, we don't know if Shaheed is the guy that Shook's going to be able to get the ball to consistently enough. But we do know that if Olave is healthy, Olave in the 5th round is where he should be valued. I mean, we talked about this last year. And I just want to go back to the 2023 kind of just season in general. Is Olave had 1, 2, 3 top 10 finishes. It was a 9, a 10, and a 10. And we look at last year, in the limited amount of time that he played last year, he finished in the top 10 once. But we look at it, we say, okay, well, why? What was going on? Well, the ball was going to Shaheed a lot early in the season. And it was really weird because from a fantasy perspective, you're like, you have a guy like Chris Olave here. What's going on? But Olave is one of those target earners. And you look at it, and you say that, oh, he has 10 targets and 14 targets. In the games where he has 10 targets and 14 targets, you are getting a player that can rack up 100 yards. But he's going to need to get those 10 targets. He's going to need to get 8 to 12 targets a game. And if you think that Olave is getting 8 to 12 targets a game, and I like Olave in the 5th round. I'm clicking him a lot in the 5th round, just diversifying a little bit. But if you think that he's going to earn 10 to 12 targets from Shook, and Shook's going to complete over 60% of them, and that's the thing, is that you have to believe.
I think Shook easily will be. I think he'll be a 65 to 68 kind of guy in percentage.
So if Shook's completing 65% of those passes and he's getting 12 targets, well, you're looking at five-ish, 6-ish
about 7 completions.
And so if he's upwards of 15 targets, that's an insane number. But he's a guy that can push past 15 points in a PPR league. Half PPR, I'm a little bit more worried for him because I don't know where his touchdown upside is at. Mainly because the Saints were not in the red zone a lot last year. So in order to kind of get that upside, you've got to go back to 2023, and he's sitting there in the same kind of conversation as, well, if he had a couple more touchdowns, it would be really nice. Because his best game in 2023 in half PPR was 18.8 points, which is, awesome to a degree there. But he's a guy that's not really forcing himself over 20 points in a given week at any one point in time. He's had 2 in 2023. And then back in 2022, in a full PPR, he had a couple over 20-point games. So I am willing to roll Olave as my 3rd or 4th wide receiver fairly consistently in best ball formats, and I really don't have an issue with that. Now, family, when we go to a guy like Tillman, now this is what I said to Joe earlier. Is this show is we're building a team, best possible team, based upon the rankings that we have that are prioritizing playoff matchups.
Yeah, so family, we don't really value, not say we don't value. We gave weeks 1 to 14, we treat them as one block equal to 15, 16, and 17 because you have to get through it. Tillman in those matchups, and guys, remember, garbage time pays out just as much as regular time.
So I'll tell you why I don't like Tillman there either, family. I'll tell you why in a minute. Yeah. Joe, go ahead.
Tillman's the number 35th player we have overall in the entire draft.
Joe, continue. I'm not saying that it's a bad player. I'm not saying he's a bad player. It's a bad pick.
Stefanski is a very good offensive coach. And yes, his quarterback will be a disaster all year long, regardless which one of the 4 it is. Tillman has the explosion factor throughout the roof. Because of what he put on tape last year, he doesn't have to go over the top. He has shown that he can catch a 10-yard in and take it to the house. You don't get that from very many receivers, aside from the ones that are immediately around him. Mims, QJ has that capability if he ever catches a damn ball. That's what you're taking with a 12th round pick, that if they get the ball, they can go to the house. Also, family, I already have Njoku on this team, who's my number 1 tight end. I don't need to overpay for a second tight end.
So it's not the pick there. I don't like that pick in particular at that position. So I think that what
I would have gotten him otherwise. I wanted him on my team, and I wouldn't have gotten him otherwise.
What I'm more so saying, Joe, is that we have been at this for a while. And one of the things when you read the board, when you read the room, is that it was very clear from the very beginning of that round that this was not going to be a pressure to take a wide receiver here. Tillman was not going to go. And it's not that I disagree with you about Tillman as a player. I think he can be an exceptional sleeper this year. However, when you selected him, I would have much rather pushed Jadon Blue or Ray Davis in that slot, pushed Tillman down to where the
But
Freiermuth
neither one of
spot
them are rated high for us.
Freiermuth
Is my point. And when I was looking at that, it wasn't.
They would,
So when you're looking specifically at Blue and Davis, we have both Algier and Allen ranked higher than them.
I'm not
I knew I was going to get both of them.
Joe, I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the pick of Tillman there was a spot where we could have gotten an extra pick inside that inside that same player pool. Heck,
yeah,
if
but
you
what you're saying I would have taken would have been a wasted extra pick. Jadon Blue and Ray Davis are both below Algier and Allen. I got the pick down there.
Okay. I mean, you can believe that.
I got better value 2 rounds later.
I'm saying that was that pick specifically for you was, I think, not because Tillman's a bad player or a bad choice, but I think that you are very much within a zone here of hyper picking a certain kind of like player like that Algier and Braylon Allen. Yeah, Algier and Braylon Allen would have been there, but this is the same kind of point that I was trying to make about Ken Walker, is that I would much rather have, knowing what our tight end pool was already. I don't value Freiermuth. If you have Njoku, I don't value Freiermuth there as much. I would rather have the extra running back, put an extra running back in our player pool. If I believe a player is going to be the number one player overall at a certain position group, like, and it's only a onesie position like Njoku, well, then I want to believe that. And I don't need to take 3 tight ends if that's the case. I'm only going to take 2. And I'm going to put that.
Do have a value to pass up. You could argue he's the luxury pick of this draft.
But I don't think it was a luxury. I don't think it was a luxury at all. I think that your idea of a luxury means that, it's got to be, it's at a position where you don't really need it. Well, I think in these DraftKings drafts, especially as I've said all year about tight ends having some of the lowest amount of points in any given week out of all positions that you can throw out in fantasy football, is that a top 10 tight end, if Ray Davis ends up as a top 10 running back, it will be way worth more than Freiermuth as a top 10 tight end. That's all I'm saying.
I understand that. I just look as far as where my team was already built at. I have what we rank as the number 1 running back,
Joe,
a top 5 running back, another top 5 running back, because against PPR and Dobbins, who's in the top 15.
I'm there with you, but when you took Tillman,
but my point is, I look at it from roster volatility. I can only start at most 3 running backs,
and that's fine.
I can only start at most 3 running backs.
Here's the point.
But I had no backup at tight end. So what's the point?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Backup running back.
Here's why.
But this is a roster construction question. This is just a flat out roster.
No,
at what point does the backup matter?
This is a roster construction standpoint question, and also a question based upon rankings. Is that when you use rankings and you are going into it with your rankings and you say, okay, I have rankings and I want to build a certain team based upon my rankings because I believe my rankings are correct. And this is kind of just a generalized discussion about rankings, is whether it's our rankings, whether it's the guy from The Score that a lot of people do for weekly decisions, whether it is other fantasy content creators rankings, whether it's Fantasy Pros or whatnot rankings in general, is that it can lock you into a certain way of thinking and say, and it showed itself in this draft specifically, is that, oh, I can get Algier and Braylon Allen. I should take this guy earlier because I don't see value in these other picks. But what I'm saying is that it's particularly important given the entirety of the season. So while our rankings kind of push more towards week 15, 16, and 17 and value them very similar to week 1 through 14, is that when I look at the volatility of an entire season, one of the things that I think is really important to go at and to mention is that it is always, for me, more important to have a bonus running back or a bonus wide receiver in the discussion point that I think that always speaking, if a running back or a wide receiver, let's just take a guy like Austin Eckler or Ray Davis as an example. We'll take Ray Davis as an example, Joe. I'm going to pull up his best week last year. And you'll be like, okay, it's probably somewhere.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in there. Okay, so if we look at his best week last year, full PPR, he landed as running back 14, 1, 2, 3 times at 14.5 points, 13.7 points, and 18.2 points. Okay. Then we take a look at Pat Freiermuth. Now, Pat Freiermuth caught like 7 touchdowns last year. So, I mean, he's going to have a decent amount of space here as well. He finished.
He also has a much better quarterback at throwing touchdowns this year.
Listen, and this is going to be some interesting kind of optics here. Is that his number 1 week was week 18, so that week didn't matter. So I'm going to say what it is, but it doesn't matter to us. It was number 1 overall. He was the number 1 tight end week 18, 22 points. Great, absolutely elite. Then we take a look at where he finished in total points. So week 13, he had 18.8 points in PPR he was number 6 tight end finisher on the week. Great. Absolutely awesome. Then you had week 4, where he was the second best tight end with only 16 points. Now, it's an interesting discussion that your top week, if you're getting into the top week of tight ends, right? The Freiermuth that 1 week was number 1 overall with 22 points. You go into that kind of same idea of running backs, and most likely the top running back in a given week was much higher.
I have no doubt that the depth of the number, number 15 running back should shatter the number.
Where
10.
I'm saying this from is that if I have a stellar option at tight end already, and we've talked about this family, I think too, is that if I have an Evan Ingram, TJ Hawkinson, Trey McBride, David Njoku, is that I don't need Freiermuth's production on a week-to-week basis, because if he's going to springboard David Njoku and have a spike week like that and a springboard David Njoku, great. But the differential is probably not going to be super high. But if Ray Davis or Eckler or Blue or White were to have a top 5 week, that is going to be an exceptional start for us in our lineup. And just kind of breaking it down a little bit more, Joe.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Bob, but it really, to me, it all comes down to is, when you're looking at Ray Davis or Blue or someone like that, you're basically just hoping that the starter, or in Blue's case, becomes the established starter by the time the playoffs come around. If you look at the guys that
you're doing the same thing with Algier. You're doing the same.
Algier is standalone value.
No,
Algier gets to walk by himself.
No,
go to Algier. He averages about 8 points a game, even when Bijan's there. When Bijan's out, he does even more. He's also a 14th round pick. If you look at the rest of these guys.
Same can be said about the other guys.
Until you get to Luke McCaffrey in the 17th round, they're all always on the field, or they're their team's third down back. That's the difference. Jalen Blue is not starting as their third down back. He can't do pass protection.
Hold on.
And he hasn't yet. I do believe he will, but he hasn't yet jumped ahead of Javonte Williams.
I'm all for that, but this is my argument here isn't against any particular player. It's against when we've talked about strategy and we talk about bring ups.
Yeah, but I don't think that a 9th round bucket is enough to say I shouldn't draft the backup. I took 3 running backs in the first 5 picks.
It's not. But when we look at
appropriate balance,
when we look at it though, okay, and we look at Freiermuth versus Dalton Schultz, okay, you took Dalton Schultz because you took CJ Stroud, which is fair. That's fine. But Dalton Schultz and Freiermuth have the same weekly upside. And so from
they don't have the same playoff schedule, and that's the difference.
From the same argument you were just making about buckets and player pools is where did you take Schultz at? 15th round, 16th round?
Like the 17th.
Okay.
16th, there you go.
I would rather take Njoku and Schultz, who you got in the 16th round, rather than Freiermuth, Schultz, and Njoku, because Schultz and Freiermuth's production high points have a differential of maybe 1 point.
Yeah, no, Schultz is a strictly floor point. I mean, I to be totally blunt, my team was kind of done at the 15th round, and all the rest of them were just either floor insurances or luxuries that go off.
But this is kind of what I'm saying, is that floor insurances are great for redraft leagues. Floor insurances is not what I want in a best ball league.
So my counterpoint to that is, I believe you need floor insurance for your onesie positions, not for the other two. I do not think you should ever touch the floor at running back or receiver.
Consider this a devil's advocate in some way.
No, I get it, but I also look at all these tight ends after him. I think he still might have the highest upside.
Who?
I mean, there's no real. I mean, Chig, as much as we drafted, we don't draft with cheap.
Who has the most upside?
I think of all the ones from the 15th down, they all have the same blah upside.
Yeah, that's the point.
Because I had Stroud is the reason I took him. It was a stat.
That's the point. That's the point for not taking Freiermuth. I'm not saying that Freiermuth is going to have
Freiermuth that category. Freiermuth, if you look at his tight end schedule,
that's
he plays in 15, 16, and 17. It's actually incredibly favorable. Freiermuth is one of my sleepers, man. Muth is one of those sleepers.
Yeah, I mean, I like the guy, but to sacrifice a running back of the caliber of the point production that Rashad White,
think Blue and Ray Davis are going to be good.
No,
I think
White. I can make a slap bet with you that White and Ray Davis will have a finish higher than Freiermuth in a given week. I mean, the thing is that
they will, and that's not the
and you could have had, but the other point is,
I don't think Ray Davis or White will ever crack my starting lineup.
Say that again.
Based upon this lineup, counting the flex, I don't think Ray Davis or White will ever crack it,
and I don't think Freiermuth will either. Therefore,
you take the insurance. If you don't think either's going to start, you take the onesie insurance.
If I'm going to do that, listen.
This is a philosophical debate right here.
No, this isn't a philosophical debate. It's a strictly strategy based point here. Is that when I look at, and this is to Family's point as well. Well, I might not like Tucker Kraft.
He might.
Joe, so let me finish. Let me finish.
A minute. All right.
We're not talking. I'm not talking about Tucker Kraft as a player right now. What I'm saying is that when looking at the big board right now, as the lay of the land shot down to us, right, is that Tillman is one of those players that, yes, a lot of people out there are pushing Tillman as the sleeper candidate of the year. Who's this year's Tillman? It's Tillman. Or Cedric Tillman. It's Tillman. So when I look at it and say, okay, would Tillman still be on the board in the 13th round? I think probably yes. And so I look at it and say, well, if I didn't get Tillman, would I be happy with any of the options on the board? Maybe not. But here's the thing. For the same thing that you were saying about Freiermuth, Joe, is that a guy like Tucker Kraft. Now, I don't want to get into the numbers about Tucker Kraft. I'm just talking about it from a strategy point right now. Is that we also had Jalen Hurts. And we know that Dallas Goedert is a valuable option in a Jalen Hurts offense. So for me, because I don't own any Steelers, and I really don't need a tight end bring back to Njoku in week 17, is that here Dallas Goedert or Tucker Kraft to the same degree, but either of those two tight ends in the 12th round, then circle back in the 13th round. And I'm fairly certain that one of those upside guys like Hollywood Brown, like Tillman, I get your point about Hollywood Brown's schedule a little bit late in the season. I understand that. It should have been there. And even if he wasn't there, then you could have took Freiermuth anyway.
Bob,
and you could have had both of them instead of Ships.
Last year, we were getting Ladd in like the 9th at the beginning. This time of the year last year, we're getting Ladd in the 9th. And then he eventually became a 7th.
Killing me.
That's what Tillman's going to be. And the family, let me hit your point here about rankings.
I'm not saying that he's not.
This is a very important thing for rankings.
In 13th round, he would have been there.
Weeks 1 to 14 combined are only equal to one playoff game. But that's not how the rankings are done when you look at them. They treat week 4 just as important as week 16. And that is not true. Week 4 is 1/14 of what week 16 is. This is about winning the league. This is not about having a nice finish in the regular season that you can then go redo. So I absolutely do not want anything to do with Kansas City because they have a horrible 15 through 17. 3/4 of what I need them for is useless. So you're not going to see me really taking any cheaps. Now,
that's fine.
So you say, why would you not want Algier? Tillman is going to be playing in games where they're going to be getting blown out in high-scoring affairs. He will dominate in the playoffs.
The point isn't that he can't do it. The point is that you made Freiermuth a luxury when there were better tight end options on the board.
Oh, no, see, I disagree with that. We have Freiermuth as number 4 tight end because of his playoff run.
But
you might just disagree where we have ranked Freiermuth, and that's the thing. I don't rank this as number 4 tight end, dude. And if you get the number 4 at any position in the 13th round, you do it.
I think that's his ceiling. His ceiling, you just saw from the numbers that I pulled up.
Yeah, so here, let's talk about tight ends real quick. We only have 2 players that we project to be consistently above 15 points per game. It is
that's pretty typical for tight ends.
Njoku and Bowers. That's it.
That's pretty typical.
We have Freiermuth rated ahead of McBride.
I don't.
That's based upon the playoff schedule. Regular season, McBride blows Freiermuth out of the water. McBride's best games are basically until week 12. And then they get into a very rough tight end stretch for him. And that's the fact. Family, I don't need him to win week 12.
Family, number 4 for a playoff run. Number 4 for a playoff run.
It's strictly looking at the playoffs. Remember, I'm treating the playoff schedule as 75% of the value, and the regular season only is 25% of the value. It's a completely different way of looking at it. The regular season does not win you money. The playoffs do. Yes, my redraft rankings are completely different because redraft, you can trade. Redraft's all about dominating the first half of the year, then trading into the playoff push. This is best ball. All that matters is the playoffs. Period. So it's all that matters.
So anyway, the tight end market, Joe, is I think one of the markets that I am at this point just kind of really, really going back and forth with a lot over the course of the season. And just kind of saying to myself, well, ideally, I probably want to land like I said earlier, I probably want to land a Mark Andrews or somebody in the first 8 to 9 rounds. Then a little bit later, I don't need 3 in these in these rounds where I'm looking for sleepers at, because I don't, quite honestly, maybe Cade Otton is probably the only one that I would consider good enough value to Cade Otton and Brenton Strange. Were any of those tight ends beyond round 12 that I would want to take more than one of, because I do think that their upside is much higher than.
I agree with Strange. I think Strange has the chance of doing something good.
But
I agree with Strange.
This point, family, is that when we look at making the playoffs to win them, when we look at this best ball format in particular, And you can go and look at many different articles, and we've said it again and again and again. And we've done shows where we play for the regular season, shows where we do 15, 16, 17, and then go do something different. Now, when we look at specifically this kind of way of approaching the draft, using a rankings list, buying into a certain player pool at a certain value, one of the things about making the playoffs to win them that's really important to know is that we made the playoffs last year in quite a few. And when we look at
a very high rate of making the playoffs,
when we look at what does you in when you reach 15, 16, 17, number one, luck of the draw. Where are you kind of seated within the rankings of everybody else, right? Second thing, injuries. So injuries compound for certain players over the course of the season. So taking younger players instead of older players towards the back half of the season can benefit you a decent amount. Then where are your stacking partners week 15, 16, 17? What are those game environments looking like? Now, the one thing
I give less credence to that than Bob does on that last point, but that's fine.
The one thing that about game environments that I think that's really relevant, and I think that's something that can't be overlooked, is that we have talked about this with guys like Amari Cooper, and we've talked about this with certain game structures and said, if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast later on in the season, weather is going to play a factor to some degree. Now, that weather is not yet baked into the lines for certain games. That is not baked into that. No, it's not. The weather's not baked in yet to that line.
It's projected at this point. It's what you projected.
So it's not like I'm not going to pull out an almanac.
Yeah,
I'm not going to pull out an almanac to see what's going on in Seattle. But
it's not to say that Chicago has like a calm, fair day and no one sees that coming because it's November.
One of the things
that kind of thing can happen that will escalate scores.
One of the things that I think is important to be cognizant of, especially when you're looking for game stacks, stacking partners and whatnot. Like, Joe, you have Tillman, you have Njoku, and you have Freiermuth against him, and you have Calvin Austin. So you have some mini stacks happening in there. It's not like you completely made those irrelevant in what degree. But one of the things for game environments that I think is really important is that we look back last year, very specifically last year, and we look at a guy like Cooper Kupp, right? Cooper Kupp at the beginning of the year was on a heater. Then the weather in San Francisco and Seattle start to turn to shit, and Cooper Kupp done. Jaden Reed, kind of the same kind of situation. When you have a scheme kind of player and you're not scheming him in a certain way, when the weather gets bad, he's going to take a hit. So that's where that kind of volume is. It really is not going to go away week 17. Devontae Adams is not going to go away week 17, but there are certain guys that will go away week 15, 16, and 17. And that's not to say that Tillman will go away, but it's just kind of to be cognizant of game matchups and weather environments, because when I look at week 17 and I see Steelers and I see Browns, and that game I believe is in Cleveland.
It is.
I believe. That's a terrible weather environment to be around. And quite frankly, while I don't think Judkins is going to have a tremendous season-long schedule, that if I am poking the bear in week 17, 15, 16, 17, specifically week 17, if I'm poking the bear that way, I'm probably going to have maybe a little bit of Dylan Sampson. I'm probably going to be running a little bit of Caleb Johnson, because I don't believe that they're going to be airing it out week 17. And that's just an anecdotal kind of point of view.
The projection for week 17 is actually the Browns get blown out at home.
Again,
looking at not to give you guys all the insights on all our betting numbers, but that is the Browns are going to get blown out and be airing the ball like crazy.
I don't have that much trust in Aaron Rodgers, so
that's the fundamental disagreement you do or don't. The numbers do.
So in this draft specifically, what we did was, Joe calculated the rankings. And
so we're valuing here to answer this question. We basically made 4 buckets, each worth the same weight. The regular season is worth a weight. Week 15 is worth a weight, 16 is a weight, and 17 is a weight. So each of the 3 playoff weeks are equal to each other, but the regular season in totality is only equal to 1 playoff week. So that's why it's so different. There's such an emphasis on the back 3 weeks.
Think of it like this, is that if you, and specifically with
you're right, no one does it like this. But this is the different approaches of how you attack it to be able to win the 2 million.
So
you got to come at it differently, or else you are based on luck.
Think of it like this, is that you're looking at your professor in college, and your professor in college says you have 4 exams. 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. And the last one, maybe the first one wasn't 25%. Maybe it was less. And the last 3 are worth more because they're the finals, or maybe they evenly distribute them. That's the best way that I think I could,
evenly distributed.
That I think I could explain this, where I slightly have week 17 with more of an emphasis on week 17. So I would slightly weigh that a little bit higher. To your comment, though, family, about you got to make the playoffs to win them. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But also, getting to the playoffs and not being able to win them is a very big problem. Is a very big problem, because if I make it to the playoffs in 150 things and I don't make it past round 15, well, yeah, I win maybe like $5 a piece. And yeah, that's some sort of money. That's fine. But if you're going for the gusto, there are, as we've shown you multiple times, and we're going to continue to show you throughout the summer, is that there are so many different ways to approach this kind of drafting, where you're looking and you're saying, as I said to Joe about Jacoby Myers. Well, while I don't have a problem with Jacoby Myers at all by any stretch of the imagination. And when I look at the Raiders schedule in particular, again, you're looking at when I'm just pulling it up right now just so I can verify. You're looking at the back end of the year. Their hardest game at the back half of that year is going to be the Eagles. But one of the things that Joe was very clear about is that and this is a game environment point again, is that they're probably going to be losing. The Eagles have a tremendous
they gotta be.
The Eagles are probably going to be winning that game by a decent amount. And so you're not shutting down Jacoby Myers or Brock Bowers. Again, the Texans are a tough defense again. And Geno Smith is a guy he's not going to not throw interceptions, but he's going to throw the ball around a decent amount. And the Texans are one of those teams that can stop Ashton Genty. The Eagles are one of those teams that can stop Ashton Genty. You know who can't stop Ashton Genty? The Giants in week 17. But that game environment, they're going to be more likely to get up to a decent early lead. And then Jacoby Myers is probably going to be a part of that. So while Jacoby Myers on paper, right, you look at it and you say, that I don't like that. I don't like Jacoby Myers where it is. And I gave Joe flack for that. The fact is that Jacoby Myers is a sound selection. He does make sense within the totality of the reasoning of both buckets, of playing week 15, 16, 17, of having a nice week 17 matchup. Even if he's only at like 806 touchdowns for most of the year, I mean, you're going to get a player here that is going to be fairly comparable to a Devonta Smith type of numbers, probably even better comparably to Zay Flowers, and you're getting him at a decent cost. Now, this kind of microcosm.
On this draft, guys, there's only really 4 players that got taken right before me that I didn't want. Lamar being one of them, and then in the 5th round, all 3 of those players. Chuba, Ridley, Kamara, they were my stack for my turn. And then Monty as the fallback. So you can say, I mean, sometimes it just doesn't fall your way. I mean, if I come out with Ridley and Kamara, Bob isn't saying a thing. But that's just and that's why every draft is also awesome, because I'm sure the way I drafted this, there are people going, wow, he just threw up a great softball because he's doing it in a different approach. You never know what approach someone else is doing next to you. They could be doing very stupid things, as family's pointing out, like starting with 6 straight receivers and then neglecting the position the rest of the year. That's why every single one of these are different, and why I invite people to do, if you're doing best ball, you got to do at least 10 of them. It's the first answer. But I also recommend be true to your rankings for at least 10 before you wander off them, because you will get wildly different results as you go at it. And you will have some times that it's like, I just feel like all of my guys are landing to me and I'm getting crazy value for this list.
So
and
just kind of
times you're not. And that's
just kind of a perspective on
this
that.
This is also part of the reason I never worry about exposure. Because it's going to change itself up by default.
Exposure is going to happen. And I just kind of want to bring this to light because that's a really important point that you're making there. And
I don't care who's McCaffrey's on every single one of my rosters.
To family's point as well is that I am drafting. One of the big takeaways from when we were talking in, I believe it was March or early May, was that it's really good to just hammer against the Bengals. The Bengals are going to be in game environments where it's going to be a delightful romp for most offenses.
They're not even playing defense in Cincinnati.
So Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison, for me, is one of those stacks. I mentioned to you earlier about the stack that I mentioned prior. I think that Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. are another elite level stack for this playoff push, mainly because they play the Bengals in week 17. I look at it and I say, on the whole season, maybe Marv's not a top 12 player on the whole season. But come playoff time, I think that he could be a top 6 player. And I'm getting a top 6 player. Say you like him as a top 8 player. I'm getting a top 6, top 8 player in the 3rd round. That's good value. And I think that when we look at it from this perspective of, I wanna build for that week 15, week 16, week 17, and I want to be prepared for all the possibilities. When you have a rankings list like this and you filter it out, and you were talking about exposure, Joe, is that I've been doing a lot of the underdog superflex leagues recently. Sure. And I have been landing in the 7, 8, 9 hole almost exclusively. And it's been really pissing me off.
Well, that's what you should be doing more. So
I can't get certain players that I know are going to win you this superflex league.
Like Lamar.
And it's annoying as all hell. However, what I think, I'm up to about 20 now. I think I've done about 20. I'm going to continue to push and push and push. But I think what's very, it might be at 16. But what's very, very clear is that I can't keep taking Kyler Murray, Bo Nix all the time. Because if I do that all the time, then I'm not diversifying. I'm not getting that exposure that comes from doing it multiple times from various draft positions. If you get stuck in the same draft position all the time,
yes,
and
that
your
is
player
true.
pool and your player pool is stuck with the same grouping of players. I think yesterday I was stuck, like I said, 7, 8, 9. I did 3, and in 3 of those, I kept my top 3 picks. My top 3 picks were CD. 3 of my top 4 picks were CD, Nico, Lad in 3 of those. So I was just like, you know what? I'm going to vary it off of those 3 guys, and I'm going to put my exposures in, and I'm going to see how it falls, because I think that there is a super massive advantage when you're in a super flex league having that 1 through 4 squad. You saw it in the drafts that we did. I showed Joe some player pools that I drew where I had Josh Allen and then drew Devin A. Chan.
Can I pump the brakes on Burrow in that cat? And this is just one thought, guys, and this is not to diminish.
Well, Burrow's not top 4. He's 5 through 7.
He's 5th. You're right. He's 5th. But this is still a Cincinnati concern to the point before of they're going to play every game 50-49. They're only playing every game 50-49 if Cincinnati controls it. Cincinnati has zero ability to stop the run. If anyone the entire season wants to take the air out of the ball and not let Burrow have it, they can do it. Cincinnati will let up more 8-minute drives than any other defense in the NFL. Really high
possibility.
It's 100% true. So if you are tied midway through the second quarter and you know you're getting the ball to start the second half, you theoretically could score with the end of halftime and then score coming out of halftime because they can't stop you. Cincinnati's defense cannot stop you. That's a given. And now you're up by 14, and Burrow only has a quarter and a half left to make up 14. Yeah, he'll chuck the ball like crazy, but you're already in clock killing mode. And he's got his limited possessions and limited comeback at you.
Yeah.
Cincinnati's inability to stop the run, particularly in the A and the B gaps, is going to haunt them by anyone who can run up the middle. And I think James Conner is going to rip them apart.
Well, if he's healthy, it's either going to be Trey. It's either going to be Trey Benson or James Conner. But when we look at when we think about Superflex, this was a regular best ball $20 buy-in Mega Millions kind of thing. But when we look at Superflex, the massive advantage you get from being drafted in 1 through 4 is that I see so many people throwing away their advantage by taking in the second round Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, Drake May. I see so many people throwing away that advantage, and there's 29 quarterbacks total typically taken in 26 to 29 quarterbacks taken in the first 5 rounds in a Superflex league. When I look at the massive advantage that you get from picks 1 through 4, the massive advantage is that you don't have to take another quarterback in the second or the third round. You can wait until the 5th round comes around for a guy like Sam Darnold, or you can wait even further for a guy like Tyler Shough.
That's a very valid point because quarterbacks are a lot like tight ends.
Advantage. It gives you such a competitive advantage but here's where you have to throw. If you are sitting at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in the Superflex league, you have to throw a wrench into that plan. And here's why I'm saying it is that, and this is something I brought up when we were doing the Superflex drafts, is that, and it's something Joe has said before as well, is that there is veritably no circumstance where in a Superflex league, if I'm drafting 6 through 12 in these best balls, not in a typical redraft Superflex league, but in best ball, that I want to go quarterback 1, 2. I don't want to do that because I need a player who is going to be able to equal the output of a Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, etc. And I'm only going to get that if I don't give up that same player to the Josh Allen owner.
You got to go a different direction.
I can't, there has been so many times, and this bugged me so much, where I see the guy that owns Lamar or Josh Allen. And it's happened to me because this is where the competitive advantage is, because everybody's pushing Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Justin Fields. And even we've done Justin Fields a little bit here and there. But pushing that and then giving the Josh Allen owner Malik Neighbors and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you're telling me not only is this person going to have the number 1 rated quarterback, but they're also going to have the number 4 and 5 wide receiver as well. You're kidding me. You can't. There is a competition, and you see it a lot in Superflex where you see double running back, double wide receiver, running back, just so those top 4 guys don't get that player pool that normally happens in a Superflex league.
Well, here's the other point, guys, and this is bigger for Superflex than it is for anywhere else. There are
absolutely
4 elite quarterbacks, just like there are tight ends. There's a few elite ones, but once you get over that cliff, they're not really that different. So reaching up, the thing that kills me in Superflex is when Mahomes goes 6. That's just asinine. The difference between Mahomes at 6 and I don't know, Lawrence at 20 isn't that much. You're talking at most 2 points a game. But if you can get an elite running back that can give you a 4-point edge over the next one, you have a decisive advantage. I mean, you got to go quarterback roulette 3, 4, and 5. But if you get 2 studs in 1 and 2, honestly, you have a fighting chance.
You can go. Here's the thing, and this is something that I think that I just want to. We talked about it last week.
We might do a Superflex here, but Bob, we might do a Superflex on Wednesday because I'm about to run out.
Yeah, ideally, round. If I'm taking a high-end quarterback in those first 4 picks, and I've said before that ideally you want to have 2 quarterbacks coming out of the first 5, 6 rounds of a Superflex draft. However, when I have that elite quarterback production, and say you don't consider, I'm just going to bring it up. CJ Stroud's a guy we like a lot, but CJ Stroud last year wasn't wasn't putting over 20 points in a given week up consistently enough. And if I look at a guy like Tyler Shook or Aaron Rodgers or even Sam Darnold around 4 or 5 or something like that, and I'm getting the 29th best quarterback. Yeah, quarterbacks always have a chance to get you over 20 points. But if I'm picking from pick number, 20, if I'm going from pick 22 down to pick 29 or anything like that, there is a conversation to be had that if you own Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, or Jaden Daniels, that it's better because you're expecting them to get top 5 production either way. It's better to actually just go against the grain and just load up a position talent and then take a Joe Flacco, Joe Flacco, Tyler Shook, Russell Wilson, some crap like that. There's a conversation to be had that is something that is better suited for a Josh Allen owner. But I've been seeing a lot of the Josh Allen, Lamar people loading up with 3 quarterbacks in the first 3 rounds and then getting their value somewhere else. But you're losing your competitive advantage when you do that because you didn't need to do that. The competitive advantage of taking one of those first 4 guys is that your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round are way open for you now. There is a pathway that you don't have to take a quarterback there. You can, but the pathway is better suited to take and push it in a different direction. But we will join you again Wednesday, 3:45 Eastern Standard Time. We'll see everybody. Thanks for everybody in the chat, family, Dark Side, Magic, and Jamie. Appreciate the love. We'll see you at 3:45 on Wednesday.
See ya, guys.